You really think I'm gonna let a soldier freeze to death on my porch?" The words flew out of Silas Maddox's mouth before his brain caught up. It was midnight, the wind howling through the trees like wolves, and snow falling thick as flour from a sifter. Yet there she was, soaked to the bone, her military coat stiff with frost, her eyes just daring him to say no. She didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't even blink. "I didn't come here to beg," she said. "I came because I had nowhere else left." Silas stepped back, just enough for the porch light to hit her full on. The girl was young, 20-something maybe, but her eyes carried the weight of decades. Her uniform was clean, but worn at the edges. Medals pinned straight, boots laced tight, shoulders square. But her lips were trembling, not from the cold, but from holding something in. "What's your name?" Silas asked. "Collins. Sergeant Ivy Collins." He hesitated. The last time he'd heard that name was... No, it couldn't be. She looked too young. "You knew my father," she added, reading his silence like a map. Silas's chest tightened. Caleb Collins. They'd bled together in the same unit 20 years back. A good man, a better friend, a hero who never made it home. "I was told you were the only one left from his platoon," Ivy continued. "I need 5 minutes, that's all." Silas opened the door. The old hinges groaned as if protesting. The farmhouse behind him was no showpiece, just drafty boards, a stubborn fireplace, and a roof that creaked every time the wind changed its mind. But it was dry, and it was warm, and tonight that had to be enough. As she stepped inside, her boots left wet shadows on the worn floorboards. Silas watched her walk in with the same straight-backed posture her father had, like even rest was a mission that had to be earned. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the fire. She didn't. She stood with her arms crossed, scanning the room like she was still in uniform, still under orders. Silas poured black coffee into a chipped mug. No cream. No sugar. Just like Caleb liked it. "You want to tell me why you're really here?" he asked. She took the mug but didn't drink. "Command says I've got 60 days of leave. Thought I'd come find the truth." Silas sat across from her. "Truth about what my father's death," she said, "and what he left behind." For a moment the room was silent save for the crackle of pine logs. Outside the wind howled harder. Inside, Silas's hands tightened around the arms of his chair. "He died a hero," Silas finally said. "So I've been told," Ivy replied, flat. "But he also left something important. And before he died, he told my mother one thing. If anything ever happens to me, send her to the Yellow House." Silas looked up. The Yellow House. The forgotten mansion. It wasn't technically his, though his name had been on the paperwork since the war. It sat just past the property line, an abandoned Victorian relic swallowed by ivy-boarded windows and a roof sloping like a broken spine. Locals whispered about it. Kids dared each other to sneak in. Even the sheriff gave it a wide berth. "Whatever your father meant," Silas said slowly, "that place hasn't seen life in 20 years. All the more reason to start there." Silas shook his head. "I don't think you understand what kind of ghosts you're waking up." Ivy stared at him, calm but unwavering. "Ghosts don't scare me. Half of them raised me." That line so raw, so quiet, it hung in the room like frost on a window pane. Silas stood and walked to the mantel, pulled a brass key from the clock's hidden compartment, and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a sharp clink. "I told your father I'd protect whatever he left behind," he said. "But I didn't think it would come to this." Ivy looked at the key, then up at Silas. "I'm not here for trouble." "No," he replied, "but trouble has a way of following that house." The next morning the snow had thickened, blanketing the landscape in a quiet that felt almost holy. Silas hadn't slept. Neither had Ivy. She sat by the fire until dawn, staring into the embers, like they might whisper the answers she wanted. At sunrise, they stood at the edge of the road that led to the mansion. From behind, they looked like opposites. He in worn jeans and a work shirt, she in crisp blues. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was history waiting to speak. The mansion loomed ahead, yellow paint, peeling dark windows like hollow eyes, and two vintage cars sunk halfway in snow, one on each side of the drive like forgotten sentries. "You sure you want to do this?" Silas asked. Ivy didn't answer. She just took the key from her pocket and walked forward. As the wind lifted her hair and flung snow sideways across the drive, Silas followed her heart, pounding not from fear, but from something deeper. Something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Hope. But hope, he knew, was a dangerous thing when buried under secrets. And that house, held more than just memories. It held the truth. And the truth was finally coming home. The front door let out a long, reluctant groan as Ivy turned the key. Snow blew past her boots into the shadowed entryway, like the house itself had exhaled after years of silence. The brass knob felt cold and heavy in her hand, as if the door had remembered being touched once before, by someone it hadn't forgotten. Silas followed behind, stepping into the foyer, like a man revisiting a long-forgotten sin. The house was still eerily so, the kind of stillness that didn't just mean emptiness, but waiting. Faint outlines of furniture stood beneath dust-cloaked sheets, wallpaper peeled like tired skin. A grandfather clock stopped at 3:17 stared blankly into the void, and beneath it all, the scent of aged wood, old secrets, and something faintly metallic. "Place smells like time stood still," Ivy muttered. "It did," Silas replied. "Since the day we came back without him." She turned. "You mean without my father?" Silas nodded, but his eyes stayed on the staircase, as if afraid it might creak and speak his guilt aloud. They walked through the main hallway, each step stirring up whispers of the past. Dust motes floated like ghosts in shafts of cold light. Ivy brushed her gloved hand along the banister. "He wrote letters to my mom," she said quietly. "Said this house was where he felt free, where he wanted to bring us when it was all over." Silas stopped in the middle of the hall. "Your father. He used to say this house didn't belong to him. It belonged to something bigger. Said it was a promise, a legacy. We all thought he was just being poetic. Turns out he meant every damn word." Ivy looked around, eyes scanning every detail like a soldier on recon. "Did he hide something here?" "Not sure. He talked in circles near the end. We were losing men left and right. He didn't trust command anymore. He said the truth had to be buried somewhere, no one would ever look. And you think he meant—" "Here." Silas gave a tired smile. "This place has been forgotten longer than most people's memories last. If there was ever a place to bury a truth, this would be it." They entered the old study. The fireplace was filled with cold ashes, and an antique piano sat silent in the corner, one key pressed down permanently, as if frozen mid-note. A shelf of war memorabilia lined the back wall, flags, medals, a photo of Caleb Collins in uniform with a younger Silas at his side. Ivy's fingers hovered over the frame, then landed gently. "You look different," she said. "I was different," he replied. She looked at him. "You were smiling." Silas let out a soft, bitter chuckle. We all smiled before the storm hit. She studied the photo, then lifted it, revealing a carved emblem in the wood behind it. A stylized compass, rose the same symbol etched into the corner of her father's last journal. Ivy froze. This was his. Silas leaned in, narrowing his eyes. "I remember him carving that during the last winter we stayed here. Said the compass would lead someone home. Back then, we thought it was metaphor." Ivy placed her palm over the carving. A soft click echoed through the wall. Behind the bookshelf, a panel of wood shifted slightly. Enough to notice, enough to realize it wasn't just a wall. Silas stepped forward, heart thudding. I didn't know this was here. Together they pried it open. A narrow corridor stretched into darkness behind the wall, no more than 3 feet wide. The air inside smelled of cedar and something else, machine oil. Ivy reached for the flashlight in her coat and clicked it on. "I go first," she said. "Soldier's instinct." "No arguments here," Silas muttered, following. The passage led them into a hidden basement. Not damp, not crumbling, but meticulously preserved. Dustless. Clean. As if someone had been tending to it even after the house had been abandoned. Rows of crates lined the walls, military-grade steel containers. Shelves stacked with documents, coded files, and one small locked safe mounted into the far wall. "What the hell is all this?" Silas whispered. Ivy opened one of the files. Her face changed. "These are declassified intel drops, satellite coordinates, project code names I haven't even heard in my unit." Silas stepped back. "Your dad? He wasn't just a soldier, was he?" She stared at the safe. "No, he was something else. And he didn't just want to protect us. He wanted to protect something bigger." Silas felt the weight of it now. The farmhouse, the forgotten mansion. All of it wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a vault. "I need to report this," Ivy said, voice steady. "Are you sure?" Silas asked. "What if there's someone out there who's been waiting for someone to open this door?" She paused. "Then they already know we're here." Outside in the heavy snow, a black SUV crept to a stop beneath the trees. The storm hadn't passed. It had just begun. The low hum of the SUV's engine died just as Ivy reached the top of the basement stairs. Silas, still gripping one of the dusty files in his calloused hand, looked up. "You hear that?" She didn't answer. She was already moving, silent as a breath-eyes narrowed hand at her side, like the muscle memory of drawing a sidearm had never left her. Except this time, she had none. Just her instinct, her training, and the name of her father echoing in her chest. Silas followed slower, wary. The house groaned in the wind, but beneath it something felt off. A pressure shift in the air, the kind you only notice when you've been hunted before. Through the cracked window of the parlor, Ivy spotted the vehicle. Black. Government issue. Tinted windows. "What kind of visitor shows up without calling and kills the engine in the dark?" she muttered. Silas stood beside her, jaw tight. "The kind who doesn't plan on knocking." She turned to him. "Is there a back way, out old root cellar? East side of the kitchen. Leads into the woods. Used to be our way out when we were dumb kids playing war." She didn't smile. "It's war again." Without another word, Ivy doubled back, gathering the most sensitive documents into her rucksack, satellite intel locations, code logs, anything marked in her father's handwriting. Silas paused as she moved with military precision. "You ever think he left all this for you?" he asked. She glanced over her shoulder. "He didn't leave it for me. He left it for the country he thought might still be worth saving." They moved quickly, slipping through the narrow kitchen, where a cracked ceramic mug still sat in the sink, frozen water inside, like time had quit mid-pour. Ivy kicked open the root cellar door. Cold earth spilled in the tunnel no wider than her shoulders. As she dropped down, Silas hesitated at the edge. "Last time I went through here," he whispered, "we were 12 and thought monsters were real." "They are," she replied. "They just wear cleaner suits now." They vanished into the dark, just as the mansion's front door creaked open above them. Outside, the snow had turned to a biting sleet, slicing sideways in the wind. Ivy led the way through the trees, boots leaving near-invisible marks in the powder. Silas stayed close behind the rucksack, digging into his shoulder. Not from weight, but from responsibility. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who'd kept his promise too long. And now the world he'd hidden from had come knocking. They moved until the trees thickened, blocking the view of the mansion behind them. Only then did Ivy stop. She crouched behind a downed log, pulled out a folded map from inside her coat, and spread it open. "Okay," she said, tapping a mark near the north ridge. "There's a relay station here still active. If I can get to it, I can send a secure signal to Fort Hamilton. They'll send someone I trust." Silas crouched beside her. "And if they don't get here in time?" She looked at him, her voice calm. "Then we finish what my father started, no matter the cost." There was a pause. Then Silas asked quietly, "You know what's in that safe, don't you?" She didn't answer, but her silence spoke louder than words. "What is it, Ivy?" She folded the map eyes, never leaving his. "My father uncovered something before he died. A corruption buried so deep in the intelligence chain it would have destroyed careers, toppled agencies. He didn't trust anyone in the command, but he trusted this house. And you." Silas stared at the snow. "I'm a janitor, Ivy. A mechanic. I barely trust myself." She shook her head. "No. You're the one man who didn't run when things got ugly. The one who stayed behind to guard ghosts." He let out a bitter breath. "That's not bravery. That's unfinished guilt." She softened. "Then finish it." Her words hung between them like smoke, unshakable, unspoken truths. They reached the ridge by nightfall. The wind was razor-sharp now, howling through the branches like an ancient warning. Ivy's hands were stiff. Her lips cracked from the cold, but she pressed on. Every step closer to the station was a step toward exposing the truth. Silas, trailing her by a few paces, suddenly stumbled. She turned, concern flashing across her face. "You all right?" He nodded, breath fogging. "Just old bones and bad luck." She grabbed his arm without hesitation. He didn't say it, but something in that small gesture thawed a part of him that had been frozen for years. "I spent most of my life thinking people like you didn't exist anymore," she said. "People like me. People who don't ask what's in it for them." He let out a tired laugh. "You don't know me, kid." "No," she said. "But I'm starting to." They crested the final hill. The relay station loomed ahead, an old, rusted communications tower, blinking faint red in the storm. Ivy exhaled her breath, coming in sharp bursts. She moved to the console at the base, punching in a series of encrypted codes she'd memorized as a child from her father's letters. "Please," she whispered, "let this still work." The screen flickered. Static. Then green. "Connected secure channel." She opened the mic. "This is Sergeant Ivy Collins. Code Echo 7 Delta. I have possession of compromised intelligence from Operation Grey Star. Requesting emergency extraction and debrief." Silence. Then confirmed. "Hold your position." A beat. Then another voice came through, a voice she hadn't expected. "Ivy," it said. Cold. Familiar. Commanding. She froze. "General Rayner," she whispered. The same man who'd promised to protect her father, and later declared his death accidental. "I suggest you power down the relay," the voice continued, "before you dig too deep." Silas stepped closer, alarmed. "What's going on?" She turned off the mic without a word. "We've been compromised," she said. "They know." Silas looked down at the rucksack in his hand, then at her. "Then I hope whatever's in that safe is enough to burn it all down." Ivy clenched her fists, fire now burning behind her eyes. "It's not just enough," she said. "It's the match." The wind screamed harder that night, tearing through the trees, like it wanted to rip the truth from the earth and hurl it into oblivion. Ivy sat with her back against a cold boulder, staring out over the silent forest below. The relay station still blinked faintly behind her, but its signal had gone quiet. She had shut it off the moment General Rayner's voice came through. Not out of fear, but strategy. Silas was tending a small, shielded fire with the kind of quiet care that only comes from a life of slow, patient things. His face was lined with questions, but he didn't ask any, not yet. Finally, Ivy broke the silence. Her voice was lower, darker than before. Rayner was the last one to see my father alive. He filed the report. Said Dad had gone unstable. Claimed he took his own life. She paused, jaw clenching. My father had a steady hand. He never once flinched until the day he disappeared. Silas didn't look up. And now the same man just told you to stop digging. She nodded. Which means I was right to come. There was a pause between them filled only by the hiss of wind and flame. Then Silas asked, "What was Operation Grey Star?" Ivy stared into the dark. A covert surveillance initiative. Officially, it was shut down 5 years ago. Unofficially, it kept going. Off-grid. Funded through black budgets. Only the highest ranks knew. She looked up at him, her eyes hollow. They weren't just watching enemy Silas. They were watching citizens, judges, journalists, even military families. Anyone who could expose what was rotting underneath. Silas leaned back, silent. And your dad tried to stop it. He tried to expose it, she said softly. And when he got too close, they didn't just kill him. They buried him in silence. Silas ran a hand through his hair, his breath visible in the cold. And what's in the safe at the mansion? It's proof it's more than that, Ivy said. It's a ledger. Names, transactions, voices, a map of corruption that runs straight through Washington's arteries. There was another long silence. Finally, Silas said, "I was just trying to fix a busted furnace when you knocked on my door. Now I'm halfway up a mountain carrying the key to a firestorm." Ivy smiled for the first time, not out of joy, but solidarity. Welcome to the war you didn't know you were already part of. They returned to the mansion before dawn. The snow had settled into a glassy stillness, like the world had paused just long enough to remember something important. Their boots crunched softly on the frozen ground as they circled to the root cellar. The air inside was heavier now. The stillness no longer felt forgotten, it felt watched. They moved quietly through the kitchen, past the cracked tiles and yellowing wallpaper. Ivy's hand brushed the corner of the table where a child's initials had been carved decades ago, CC, her father's. She paused, pressing her palm over the letters, as if to ground herself. In the study, the fire had long gone cold, but something new waited. The front door was ajar, just enough to be intentional. Silas froze. "You lock it before we left." Ivy shook her head. "I never touched it." She drew her sidearm from the rucksack, an old M1911 she'd kept wrapped in a wool sweater. She checked the chamber. 1 round already in. "Stay close," she whispered. They advanced through the hallway like dancers in a nightmare, each creak of the floorboards loud enough to betray them, each shadow a threat. The grand staircase yawned above them, but their destination lay behind the sliding shelf in the office, where the safe had waited untouched for over 2 decades. Except now the shelf was already open. The safe, an old Cold War relic, stood exposed, and its lock was broken. Ivy's breath hitched. "No," she said under her breath, rushing forward. Inside the safe, the files were gone. All of them. She backed away as if struck. Her father's years of secrecy, his sacrifice. It was all gone in a hollow metal box. But then Silas's voice cut through. "Wait." He stepped forward, knelt down, and ran his fingers along the bottom panel. He tapped once, then again. A hollow thud. He looked up at her. Double floor. Old mechanic's trick. Sounded off. Ivy dropped beside him. Together, they pried loose the false bottom, revealing a smaller compartment, no bigger than a lunchbox. Inside it, a single cassette tape labeled in her father's shaky script. Play only if she finds the truth. They didn't speak again until they were deep in the cellar, where the thick stone walls would muffle any listening device. Silas produced a battered old cassette player from a crate of junk. He inserted the tape, clicked it closed, and hit play. The voice that filled the room was gravelly, familiar. Her father. If you're hearing this, Ivy, then you made it farther than I ever could. I knew they'd come, knew I couldn't outrun them forever. But I left a trail, not in paper, in people. You'll need them men and women I once trusted who vanished into the cracks for a reason. The tape hissed, then continued. They'll say I went mad, that I betrayed my country. But I never betrayed what I believed in, and that was you. Silas lowered his head. You are my best judgment, Ivy, my last hope. And if you found the safe, then you've also found the name buried in it, Reynard Vale. Find him. He's the beginning, and maybe the end. Click. Silence. Ivy closed her eyes, hands trembling. Silas whispered, Reynard Vale. Who is he? Ivy opened her eyes slowly. The man who built Grey Star, she said. The only one who knows how to take it down. The cassette tape had stopped, but her father's voice still echoed in Ivy's chest like a drumbeat that refused to die. Reynard Vale. Even saying the name felt like opening a sealed door. Silas could see it in her eyes, that faraway stare soldiers get when memory mixes with dread. She didn't move for a long while, just sat there, tape in hand, knees drawn close like a child who suddenly remembered she was someone's daughter. Silas finally spoke. You okay? No, she whispered. But that's not the point. They spent the morning scouring the study, every drawer, every loose plank. The safe was empty now except for that single tape, and that made it more dangerous than if they'd found nothing. Because now they had a name, and someone else knew they did. Ivy pieced together what little her father had left behind. Redacted documents, hand-drawn maps, a crumpled photo of 5 men in military dress. One man's face had been circled in red ink. Beneath it, scribbled faintly, Reynard. Halls of Justice, Montgomery. Silas frowned. Montgomery's 2 states over. I don't care if it's on the moon, Ivy said. That man knows what killed my father, and what's about to swallow this country whole. They loaded up the truck by dusk. Ivy had found a rusted .308 rifle in the attic wrapped in a flannel blanket. She checked the sights, cleaned it, and placed it gently on the back seat. Silas eyed it. You planning on knocking or kicking the front door in? I'm planning on being ready when someone else does. There was a beat of silence. Then Silas said, You know, you don't have to do this alone. Ivy looked at him, tired but grateful. I dragged you into this, Silas. You don't owe me a thing. He shook his head slowly. No, but I owe him the man who used to sit on that front porch with his daughter in his lap and tell her the world was still good. He paused. And I owe you. Ivy blinked back the wet heat behind her eyes. He always said, Silas continued, the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs someone brave enough to carry it. They drove through the night, past the ghost towns, past the billboards advertising lives no one was living anymore. The silence between them was not empty, it was full of understanding. Somewhere after midnight, Ivy leaned her head against the window. Her voice broke the quiet. I used to think justice was a scale, balanced, fair. Silas kept his eyes on the road, and now she looked at him. Now I think justice is a torch, and someone has to be willing to burn to carry it. They reached Montgomery by dawn. The city was waking slowly, its streets slick with last night's rain. Silas parked a block away from the courthouse. Ivy checked her weapon and her ID, not as a soldier, but as someone who used to matter in uniform. Inside, they asked for public archives. The clerk looked confused. Those aren't available. Budget cutbacks. Renovation. Silas leaned in. We're looking for Renard Vale, former systems engineer, civilian contractor on a retired surveillance program. This address says he consults here. The clerk flinched slightly. Sir, he's in danger, Ivy said. And if you don't point us to him, a lot more people will be too. The woman hesitated, then reached under the desk and scribbled something on a sticky note. She slid it across the counter, never making eye contact. Second floor. Maintenance wing. End of the hall. No cameras. No cameras. That was all Ivy needed to hear. The hallway buzzed with silence. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead like they were trying to warn them. A single door waited at the end, marked records in faded gold letters. Ivy knocked once. A voice answered. Warn. Alert. Who sent you? Someone who bled for the truth, she replied. Silence. Then the door opened. The man who stood behind it was older than she expected, early 70s, hunched with time but sharp-eyed. His silver hair was swept back in thick waves. He wore a threadbare sweater and a name tag that said, Only R. Vale. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, You have her eyes. Ivy's breath caught. You knew my father. Vale nodded slowly. He saved me once. I've been trying to return the favor ever since. She stepped into the room. It was nothing more than an old records office, metal cabinets, stacks of forgotten files, an ancient coffee pot on a hot plate. But Vale locked the door behind them and pulled down the blinds. Then he reached into a file cabinet and retrieved a box. Inside, discs, photographs, sealed evidence bags, a sealed military tribunal transcript. He handed it to her. Grey Star didn't just watch people, Vale said. It silenced them. Whistleblowers. Veterans. One of the contractors disappeared after testifying. 2 were found dead, overdoses staged. Your father knew the next name on the list was his. Ivy's hand trembled as she touched the sealed report. Her father's name was scrawled on the header in blue ink. Classification disputed. Why hasn't this come out? Vale looked at Silas, then back at her. Because the system that's supposed to expose the truth is the same one that buried it. Suddenly, glass shattered across the room. Gunshots ripped through the hallway. Down, Silas shouted, grabbing Ivy and dragging her to the floor. Vale yanked open a panel beneath his desk, revealing a hidden trapdoor. Go emergency exit through the archives tunnel. Move bullets tore into the ceiling tiles. Ivy clutched the box and scrambled after Silas into the crawlspace. Vale, slamming the hatch behind them just before the door burst open above. As they tumbled into the dark, dust-filled tunnel, Ivy could hear the footsteps echoing above. They found us, she whispered, clutching the box to her chest. No, Silas said through clenched teeth as he helped her up. They followed us. They ran through the darkness beneath the courthouse, breath-shallow footsteps echoing like gunshots. Ivy clutched the evidence box against her chest, as though it were a child, something living and fragile. Left Vale's voice echoed from behind. There's a maintenance ladder. It'll bring you up into the alley. Silas grunted. That alley better not be crawling. Not yet, Vale replied. But they will be. They reached the rusted ladder. Ivy scaled it first, lifting the box carefully above her head. At the top, she pushed open a storm grate and emerged into pale daylight. She turned, extended a hand for Silas, and he came up fast behind her. Vale stayed below. Come on, Ivy shouted down, but the old man shook his head. I've spent my whole life hiding in the dark for what I knew. Time I finally stood up and gave them something to chase. No, Ivy's voice cracked. You don't have to, I do, he said calmly. Because if they follow me, they don't follow you. His last words echoed as he slid the hatch shut and disappeared beneath the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Silas grabbed Ivy's arm. We have to go. They drove with no plan, just distance. Ivy's hands trembled on the wheel. The city disappeared behind them like a bad dream. It wasn't until they hit a gas station 2 hours out that she pulled over. She didn't speak, just sat in the driver's seat staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman who looked back at her wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a daughter. She was something else now. Someone being hunted for, holding the truth. Silas got out and filled the tank. When he slid back in, he said nothing for a while. Then softly, "You blame yourself," she nodded. "I've lost too many people. Some I couldn't save. Others I led straight into danger. You didn't lead Vale anywhere. He followed me into the fire. He chose it. Because some people would rather burn for the truth than live comfortably with a lie." They spent the night in a roadside motel. Ivy locked the door, wedged a chair under the knob, checked the rifle twice. She still couldn't sleep. The motel TV buzzed in the corner, news playing on low volume. Unidentified government contractors said to be investigating a data breach. Officials deny claims of missing witnesses or leaked files. Silas lay on the second bed, arms folded under his head. They're already covering their tracks. They always do. She reached for the box again, opening it quietly. Inside, under the transcripts, lay something she hadn't seen before. A letter. Handwritten. "Ivy, if you're reading this, then I've failed to finish what I started, but you still can. Not with guns, not with rage, but with what they fear most. The truth." She pressed the paper to her chest as if it might bring him back. Silas sat up. "What if we go public?" She looked at him. "They'll discredit us before we even hit the air, unless—" He trailed off. "Unless we don't go to the airwaves." She raised an eyebrow. "We go to the source. The place where your dad served, where he uncovered this. The veterans still remember him, right?" Her eyes widened. "Camp Holloway," she whispered. "It's still active. They run a truth and reconciliation panel for former intelligence personnel." Silas nodded. "So we bring it to them. Let the voices they can't silence testify." The next day they arrived at Camp Holloway old brick buildings, standing stoic under the falling snow. Ivy wore her dress uniform. She hadn't put it on in over a year. The ribbons still shimmered faintly. At the entrance, an MP stopped them. "Ma'am," she stood tall. "Sergeant Ivy Grace, retired. I'm requesting access to see Director Rains. Top priority. Is he expecting you?" "No. But he'll want to see this." She held up the box. The guard blinked, then radioed in quietly. 5 minutes later, a woman in a gray suit emerged from the administration building. "Director Rains will see you." Now. The office was warm, neat, impersonal. Director Rains looked up from his desk, a man in his 60s, dignified, but with eyes that had seen compromise. "You've stirred quite the storm," he said, without standing. "Good," Ivy replied, "because storms reveal what's been buried." He eyed the box. "Is that what I think it is?" Silas placed it on the table. Rains leaned in slowly. As he skimmed the contents, his brow furrowed. His hand tightened on a page with Reynard Vale's signature. Then he sat back, very still. "You know what happens if this goes public." "Yes," Ivy said. "Then why bring it here? Because we still believe the system can work, if there's even one honest man left inside it." That hung in the air like a dare. Rains tapped his fingers. Then after a long breath, he said, "Give me 48 hours. No press, no phones. Stay on base. I'll convene the panel." Ivy held his gaze. 48. After that, we go to the people. That night, as snow fell gently outside the barracks, Silas stood with Ivy on the porch. He looked at her, the light catching in her eyes. "You were never just your rank." She turned to him. "And you were never just the janitor at the school." He smiled. "Funny, isn't it? All the roles we hide behind, but when it counts, it's the soul that shows up." She nodded, then added softly, "If we make it through this, there's something I want to show you." "What?" She looked toward the stars. "Home, the place my dad took me when I was little. Said it was where the truth echoes loudest." Silas tilted his head. "What do you mean?" She turned to him with a faint smile. "A forgotten mansion." The road curled like a ribbon through the winter pines, leading them deeper into the forgotten hills of Vermont. Snow fell gently, settling on the windshield, in soft bursts, muffling the world outside, like nature itself was holding its breath. Silas adjusted the heater dial, glancing at Ivy in the passenger seat. Her hands were folded in her lap, but her posture was stiff, like a soldier still waiting for orders. "You sure this is the place?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Dad used to call it the last quiet. Said when the world got too loud, he'd drive here just to hear what his heart was still saying." Silas smiled faintly. That man was a poet, hiding in a soldier's uniform. She didn't respond at first. Then softly, he believed the truth could outlive the lies, if someone loved it enough to carry it. They turned onto a gravel path nearly buried in snow. At the end stood a grand but crumbling Victorian mansion, shuttered windows, sagging roof lines, ivy strangling the columns. Time had leaned heavily on it, but somehow it still stood. Just like her father had. They parked beneath a rusted wrought iron archway. As Ivy stepped out, boots crunching in the snow, the wind picked up, swirling white around her, like a curtain parting. Silas followed his breath, fogging. "Feels like we're walking into a memory." "No," Ivy whispered. "Feels like we're waking one up." The front door creaked open with a shove. Inside, dust hung like a second atmosphere. Faded portraits watched them from peeling walls. An old piano leaned in the corner, one key stuck halfway down like a secret it couldn't quite finish telling. They wandered through the silence. Each room was a whisper of what had been maps on the walls, tacked notes in her father's handwriting. Yellowed files, photos of men in uniform, most now gone. And then in the study she found it. A wooden chest sealed with her father's personal insignia. Silas knelt beside it. "What do you think is in there?" "Closure," Ivy said. She opened it. Inside, tapes. Dozens. Labeled by year, by operation, by names. She sifted through them, breath catching at familiar code words. Falcon Watch, Winterline. Orchid Black. She found one marked only for Ivy. "When she's ready." Her hands trembled. They set up the old projector, and as the film flickered to life, her father's voice filled the room. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone. And if you've made it this far, Ivy, then I know you're the one I always hoped you'd become." Silas sat beside her, unmoving. This house, this place, it isn't just memory. It's the last vault they forgot to erase. You'll find files beneath the floorboards, testimonies, names they buried under silence. And you'll find proof I wasn't crazy. You'll also find why they tried to erase me. The film cut to shaky handheld footage. Her father in uniform, an interrogation, documents, a young soldier trembling as he confessed to falsifying casualty reports under orders. Ivy pressed a hand to her chest. "They doctored their own failures," she murmured, and blamed the men who tried to fix it. She didn't notice she was crying until Silas handed her a handkerchief. He spoke quietly. "You still want to give this to the tribunal?" "Yes," she said firmly. "But that's not all." She walked to the wall and pulled down a dusty frame. Behind it, a hidden compartment. Inside, another envelope. She opened it. A deed. To the house. And a letter. "To whoever finds this next, if you carry the truth, this place is yours. Protect it. Share it. Or burn it down if it becomes a lie." Ivy looked around the room, her father's past laid bare, waiting for a future brave enough to carry it. She turned to Silas. "We don't just leak this." He raised a brow. "No. We rebuild. We turn this into a place where the voiceless speak. where the forgotten become known. His eyes searched hers. You mean a truth sanctuary? She nodded. For veterans, for whistleblowers, for the people like my dad who died unheard. He exhaled. That's bigger than just proving he was right. No, she said, voice low and steady. It's about making sure no one else has to die, wondering if the truth was worth it. They stayed up through the night, cataloging, recording, scanning. Snow piled outside the windows, but inside the house glowed with the quiet light of resurrection. And sometime near dawn, when the fire in the hearth had burned down to golden embers, Silas looked at Ivy not like a partner in mission, but like a man seeing something sacred. I've spent most of my life cleaning up after other people's messes, he said. She turned to him, eyes soft. Then maybe it's time, she whispered. We build something no one has to clean up. By the time they returned to town, the mansion's walls no longer echoed with just memory. They pulsed with purpose. The files were scanned, backed up, encrypted, and secured across cloud drives Silas barely trusted. Ivy had spent every spare moment cross-referencing names and operations with public military records, cataloging inconsistencies, marking patterns. But they both knew what was coming. This isn't just a reckoning, Silas muttered one night, as they sat in the small living room of his farmhouse laptop, glow flickering against his tired features. This is a war truth against comfort. Ivy looked up from the binder in her lap. Comfort always screams the loudest when it's about to be disrupted. He studied her for a long moment, then leaned forward, his voice low. There's a file here, Operation Meridian. It connects 3 active generals. If we go public, they won't just push back, Ivy. They'll come for you. She closed the binder with a soft thud. Let them. I'd rather stand in the fire than live one more day pretending it doesn't exist. Silas exhaled. God, you're like him. Your father. Her gaze softened. He didn't raise me to survive. He raised me to serve. And now, I serve the truth. 2 days later, the first warning arrived. A black SUV parked outside Silas's property for 6 hours. No one got out. No plates. No movement. The next morning, Ivy's military access was revoked without explanation. Then came the email, anonymous, untraceable. We know what you found. Bury it. Or you'll be buried first. She read it aloud, her hand steady, her voice even. Silas stared at her. You don't flinch, not even now. I flinched the day they told me he died. Disgraced, she said quietly. I flinched for 10 years. Not anymore. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. So what's the next move, Commander? She hesitated, then smirked. We take it to the court of last resort. The press? No, she said. The people. They began filming a documentary raw footage of the files clips of the interrogation tapes, Ivy reading her father's letter, Silas narrating the journey from janitor to truthkeeper. They didn't dramatize it. They didn't have to. The truth was already electric. They launched a website called The Last Quiet. Within 48 hours, it went viral. Veterans began sending messages. Soldiers with scars they weren't allowed to speak of. Families of the discharged, dishonorably begging for the files on their loved ones. One message simply read, You gave my dad his name back. Thank you. Another, my son died under non-combat conditions. Can you help me understand what really happened? Silas sat in stunned silence reading them. I thought, I was just helping you tell your dad's story, Ivy said softly, and now you're helping thousands tell theirs. But not everyone celebrated. A local news anchor ran a segment calling it Military Defamation by a Bitter Daughter and her janitor-turned-activist boyfriend. Silas winced. They made me sound like I mop up conspiracies. Ivy chuckled. Better than being called a traitor, which they've already started doing to me. That night, someone slashed Silas's truck tires. The next, a brick crashed through the farmhouse window with a note: "Stop digging." Before you're buried next to him. Silas held the brick in his hands like it was something holy. Truth shakes people. But lies burn them from the inside out. 2 weeks later, Ivy was subpoenaed by a closed-door military tribunal. "They want to silence you," Silas said, pacing. "Then they'll have to hear me first," she answered. He paused. "Promise me something." "What?" "When they try to smear, you don't fight like a soldier. Fight like a daughter." That stopped her. Why? Because daughters remember the man. Soldiers only remember the cause. Her eyes welled. "That's the most beautiful damn thing anyone said to me in years." He smiled gently. "Then let's win this for the man." At the tribunal, Ivy stood in full dress uniform facing a panel of expressionless officers and attorneys. She laid down a folder. These documents were recovered from Colonel Rourke's personal archives, hidden from official records, and omitted from his court-martial hearing. Where were they obtained? One officer demanded. His safe house. On property he owned before the army cut him loose. "And you expect us to believe?" "No," she interrupted. "I expect you to read. And I expect you to do for him what he spent his life doing for others, listening." The silence was deafening. She placed the last tape on the table. "My father died, labeled a traitor. But you know what he really was." Her voice trembled. He was the one man in a broken system who still believed in honor. Back outside, Silas waited. She stepped down the cold granite steps of the federal building, chin high. He looked up at her. "How'd it go?" She smiled through tears. "I think, for the first time in a decade." Someone listened. He took her hand. Then maybe he whispered, "The truth isn't the only thing that got saved today. You're trending on every veterans forum in the country," Ivy said, scrolling through hundreds of posts. "They're calling you the man who swept the truth clean." Silas raised an eyebrow. Not sure if that's a compliment or a punchline. She looked up. "You're becoming a symbol, Silas, for something a lot of people thought didn't exist anymore: ordinary courage." He leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded. "I never asked to be that." "You didn't have to. The right kind of courage never does." 2 days after the tribunal, the mansion's snow-covered gates stood open again. A news crew had asked for an interview on the grounds. Silas hesitated, but Ivy nodded. "Let them come. Let them see where it started." The cameras arrived just after dawn, crunching over frost-bitten grass, panning slowly to the silhouette of the forgotten Victorian behind them. Silas walked beside Ivy through the field. His flannel jacket flapped in the wind. Hers, military-issued, fitted and proud, stood firm against the cold. The reporter adjusted her mic. "Why this place? Why not just bring the files to Washington?" Ivy glanced up at the mansion's broken windows, the porch sagging slightly like a man bent under memory. "Because this house is the crime scene," she said. "And the monument to what Silas answered, to silence, and to what happens when someone finally dares to break it." Later, as the film crew packed up, a boy no older than 10 stood near the tree line watching. His mother called to him, but he didn't move. Silas walked over. "Hey there, bud." The boy hesitated, then blurted, "My dad was a soldier. They said he gave up. But Mama said that wasn't the whole truth." Silas knelt down, meeting his eyes. "Sometimes the truth's bigger than the story people are comfortable telling." The boy looked toward Ivy. "She's a hero, right?" Silas smiled softly. "She's more than that. She's someone who didn't stop digging even when it got dark." The boy nodded. "Then I won't either." That night, Ivy sat on the hood of Silas's truck under the stars, knees hugged to her chest. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked. Silas didn't answer right away. He was looking at the mansion. Then quietly, "Truth doesn't have an end, Ivy. It ripples. What we started, that'll carry." She stared up at the stars. "I used to think justice was something you earned. Turns out it's something you fight for, even when you never see it yourself." Silas took a deep breath, then sat beside her. "I think your dad would have been proud." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her hand found his in the dark fingers curling around calloused knuckles. 2 days later, an official military apology was released on every major network. After thorough review and new evidence submitted by Commander Ivy Rourke, the Army formally recognizes Colonel Thomas Rourke's actions as honorable and consistent with the highest values of military service. Ivy didn't cry until the line, "We are sorry for the pain our silence caused." And even then, she cried quietly, shoulders shaking, eyes closed, lips pressed together like she was holding her father's hand from across time. Silas stood behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "You did it," he whispered. "You gave him his name back." She turned, wrapped her arms around him, and for a long time they didn't say anything. Because sometimes the only word that fits is silence. But this time it was a healing one. 2 nights later, the mayor of Brookhaven invited them both to speak at the Veterans Memorial dedication. Silas had never worn a suit in his life. "Are you sure they want me up there?" he asked Ivy, adjusting his collar like it was a noose. "They don't want the suit," she said with a smile. "They want the man who never walked away." He looked at her for a long moment. "Funny," he murmured. "That's exactly what I think when I look at you." The crowd stood in silence as Ivy took the stage first. She spoke without notes. "My father taught me a lot of things: how to shoot, how to salute, how to square my shoulders when the world wanted to see me fold. But the most important thing he ever taught me was this: honor doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs someone brave enough to hold it steady in the dark. That's what Silas did. That's what so many of you have done every time you told the truth when it cost you something." Then she stepped back. Silas hesitated as the applause rose, then slowly stepped forward. He cleared his throat. "I ain't got a fancy uniform, and I don't speak like a politician. I'm just a dad who fixes things for a living. But sometimes, the thing that needs fixing ain't broken. It's just been forgotten. And I guess that's what this mansion was. That's what Ivy's dad was. Forgotten. Not anymore." When the wind shifted that night, it carried something different through Brookhaven, less like a storm and more like a promise. The kind that says some houses are haunted not by ghosts, but by the truths we leave behind. And the kind of love brave enough to walk through those doors. It doesn't just change the story. It rewrites it. It snowed the night before the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Thick, soft flakes drifted down like forgotten prayers, layering the grounds of the old mansion in silence once more. But this time, the silence wasn't abandonment. It was reverence. Ivy stood at the front window, watching the white settle on the railings. She was dressed in civilian clothes, now simple sweater, dark jeans. But she still stood like a soldier. One hand on her hip, the other holding the medal they'd posthumously awarded her father. She turned when Silas entered, brushing snow from his shoulders. "They fixed the brass plate," he said, smiling. "Got the spelling of Rourke right this time." She looked at him, voice barely above a whisper. "Took 20 years and one stubborn janitor." He shrugged. "Told you I don't sweep well under rugs." They shared a laugh that didn't quite reach their eyes, and then she nodded toward the medal. "I don't know where to put it. Feels wrong to box it up, but I don't think I can look at it every day either." Silas looked at the empty fireplace mantel. "Put it somewhere your heart can visit, but your pain doesn't have to live." She stared at him. "Where did you get words like that?" He smiled gently. "From losing things I didn't know how to carry. and learning not everything broken needs fixing. Some things just need holding. Outside the town had gathered. Veterans in old uniforms, teachers, mechanics, teenagers in hoodies holding hot coffee and paper flags. And among them, a little girl with one arm holding her mother's hand, the other clutching a drawing of the mansion with hearts in the windows. Mayor Jenkins stepped up to the microphone. "Before we cut this ribbon and turn this place into a museum, there's someone else who needs to speak." Ivy looked surprised, then watched as Silas motioned toward the girl in the crowd. She stepped forward, maybe 6 years old, eyes wide with both awe and innocence. "I drew this for the lady who made her daddy a hero again," she said, handing Ivy the picture. "Mama said some stories don't have happy endings. But I think she was wrong." Ivy knelt, voice catching. "I think you might be right." Back inside the mansion after the ceremony, Ivy and Silas wandered through the newly cleared hallways. Where once cobwebs clung like grief, now photographs lined the walls of soldiers, of families reunited, of names once buried in red tape and silence. In the study, Silas paused by the desk that had once belonged to Colonel Rourke. On it lay a folded flag, his personal journal, and a single letter never mailed. Ivy picked it up, her fingers trembling. "To my daughter," it read. "I don't know if history will tell the truth, but you will. You always could see past uniforms and orders. If this letter finds, you know that I never stopped believing in honor, not the kind written in medals, but the kind that lives in the quiet choices we make when no one is looking. I love you. I'm proud of you. Always." She pressed the letter to her chest, tears falling silently onto the old wood. Silas didn't speak. He just reached out, took her hand, and stood beside her. Sometimes presence is the only language grief understands. That night, they sat on the mansion steps wrapped in a shared blanket drinking cocoa, like kids watching the stars remember their names. Ivy glanced sideways. "Do you think we've done enough? That it's finished?" Silas looked up at the sky. "I don't think stories like this ever really finish. They settle, like snow. Quiet. But they stay." She sighed. "It feels like a door closed." He turned to her, eyes gentle. "Maybe. But sometimes, the best part comes after you walk through it." She stared at him. "You mean us?" He didn't smile this time. He just said, quiet and true, "I mean healing. I mean home. I mean, maybe love." Then, from inside the mansion, a light flickered on a motion sensor triggered by nothing but stillness. Ivy laughed through her tears. Even this house is starting to believe again. Silas leaned his head back and exhaled. "Good. 'Cause I think it deserves a second chance." She looked at him and whispered, "So do you." He turned toward her, surprised, but only for a second. Because somewhere deep down, he'd been waiting to hear those words his whole life. And this time, he believed them. Spring came early to Briar Hollow. The snow melted gently that year, not in a rush, but like it knew what had been buried under its quiet weight needed time to rise again. And as daffodils pushed through thawed soil and robins returned to old porches, the mansion at the edge of town no longer looked forgotten. It looked lived in. Silas had kept the old brass key, though the doors had long since been fitted with security pads and electric locks. Something about the weight of it, cold and honest in his palm, reminded him why he stayed. He stood now in the main hall, where sunlight warmed the polished floors, and visitors murmured gently as they walked past displays. Children laughed near the shadow boxes. A veteran wept quietly by the wall of names. Ivy appeared at his side without a sound. "How many today?" she asked, brushing her hair behind one ear. She looked softer now, not because she'd let go of the soldier in her, but because she no longer needed it as armor. Silas checked the ledger on the front desk. 212 before noon. She smiled. That's 212 more people who know the truth. He looked at her. And 2 who lived it. She met his eyes. 3, she corrected gently, resting a hand on her belly. Silas froze, then smiled the way a man smiles when everything he never dared hope for arrives. Quietly, without permission, and absolutely meant to be. You sure? She nodded. Doctor confirmed yesterday. He swallowed. Boy or girl? She shrugged. They said it's too early. But I don't care, he laughed. Neither do I. Then he grew quiet. Ivy, you've got your life at your command. You don't owe me anything. She stepped closer. Silas, I'm not choosing you because I owe you anything. I'm choosing you. Because when everything else was noise, you were the one thing that felt like home. His voice cracked. You saved me. She shook her head. No. You saved yourself. I just saw it. Later that afternoon, they took a walk down the gravel path behind the house. The old oak tree still stood stubborn and gnarled like a sentinel of time. A swing hung from one branch, now brand new, hand-carved with Rourke legacy etched into the seat. Children from the town played there sometimes for hours. Silas and Ivy sat on a bench nearby. You ever think it's strange, he asked, that something once filled with ghosts could turn into a place that heals people? She smiled. No, because healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about telling the truth and still choosing to love. They sat there in silence, long enough for the wind to pick up and the light to soften. Then Ivy reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded sheet. It was a flyer, community repair workshop, led by Silas Gray. Teaching skills, restoring purpose. Saturdays, 10 a.m. in the mansion barn. He blinked. What is this? You're good with your hands, she said, and even better with people. I thought maybe it's time you start building more than furniture. He looked down, then up. You think anyone would come? She grinned. I think they already are. A few weeks later, on a bright Saturday morning, the barn behind the mansion came alive with laughter and sawdust. Kids with crooked tool belts hammered beside their parents. Elderly veterans sanded planks while telling stories no one had asked for in years. There were coffee cups and peanut butter sandwiches, and music playing low from a dusty radio Silas had fixed himself. And in the center of it all stood Silas, his long hair pulled back, hands calloused, heart full, guiding a 12-year-old boy on how to square a frame. You see, son, he said, sometimes it's not about what's broken. It's about what's worth building. The boy nodded. Like people, Silas smiled. Exactly like people. That night, back at the mansion, Ivy sat beside the fire, feet curled under her. Her belly was showing now, just enough to rest her hand on. Silas brought her tea. They didn't speak for a while. Just let the flames do the talking. Then she turned to him, eyes soft. Do you ever think about what your father would say? If he could see this now. He took a long breath. I think he said slowly he'd be proud. I didn't follow in his silence. That I learned to speak in my own way. She reached for his hand. And in that quiet, beneath the roof of a house once forgotten, with the warmth of new life between them, and the hum of second chances still echoing through the walls, they sat together, not as soldiers or survivors, but as two people who chose to believe in what could be made from broken things. Not perfection, but wholeness, and the kind of love that doesn't need to shout, because it simply stays. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We read every word, and your stories matter too.